Do animals have an afterlife? It's a question that lingers in the hearts of those who have shared their lives with a beloved pet. We feel their love, their loyalty, their unbreakable bond with us. But when they pass, is that truly the end? Or is there something greater waiting beyond this life? A place where love does not fade and companionship is never lost? What if I told you that I have seen the answer with my own eyes? That I have walked the boundary between this world and the next? And what I discovered changed everything I believed about life, death, and the fate of the animals we cherish. My name is Daniel Carter. I am not a preacher, nor am I a man prone to visions or fantasies. I was just an ordinary person living an ordinary life, until the day I died. For years, I never gave much thought to the idea of an afterlife, let alone the possibility that animals might have a place in it. But my perspective changed in a single moment, when tragedy struck, and I found myself standing in a realm beyond anything I could have imagined. There, in the presence of Jesus Christ himself, I was given an answer that few have ever received, a truth that I now feel compelled to share with you. Before I take you on this journey, I need you to open your heart. Let go of doubts, of assumptions, of what you've been told about the finality of death, because what I am about to reveal may challenge everything you thought you knew. This is not just a story. It is a testimony, and if you have ever loved an animal, truly loved one, then this message is for you. But to understand the depth of this revelation, you must first understand my pain. You must know where my journey began, and how a single, unexpected encounter changed the course of my life. It started with loss, deep, unbearable loss, the kind that strips away all purpose, leaving nothing but emptiness. My wife, Emily, was my entire world. A kind-hearted veterinarian, she dedicated her life to caring for animals, believing that every creature, great or small, deserved love. When she died suddenly from a brain aneurysm, my world collapsed. I no longer saw meaning in my days. Each moment stretched endlessly, filled with silence and grief. I withdrew from everything, sinking deeper into despair, convinced that no light could ever penetrate my darkness again. But then, one cold evening, I heard it, a faint whimper coming from a nearby alley. It was a sound I almost ignored, but something made me stop. That moment, small, seemingly insignificant, was the turning point, the beginning of something I could never have foreseen, because the tiny creature I found that night would not just save me. He would lead me to a truth beyond this world. Emily was the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it. She had a quiet grace, a gentle heart, and a kindness that extended not just to people, but to every living thing. As a veterinarian, she believed that animals weren't just companions. They were souls worthy of love, care, and respect. She often told me, "Every creature has a purpose, Daniel. Even the smallest life is part of something bigger." I never thought much about those words back then. I loved Emily, and I was pressed against his thin coat, his paws raw from the rough pavement. Someone had abandoned him there, left him to die. I should have walked away. I wasn't an animal person. I had enough of my own problems. The last thing I needed was another responsibility. But as I looked into his eyes, those dark, pleading eyes, I felt something shift inside me. A whisper of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Without thinking, I bent down and scooped him into my arms. He was so light, so fragile, yet the moment I held him, he stopped shaking. He nestled against me as if he already knew, somehow, in that instant, that I wouldn't leave him behind. I took him home, still telling myself it was temporary. I'd feed him, warm him up, and then find a shelter. I wasn't planning on keeping him, but that first night, as I watched him sleep curled up in a blanket by the fireplace, something inside me cracked. For the first time in months, the silence in my home wasn't unbearable. For the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, I found myself at the pet store, buying food, a bed, and supplies I never thought I'd need. I wasn't sure why. I still wasn't convinced I wanted a dog, but something in me wasn't ready to let him go. Naming him felt too personal, too permanent. But as the days passed, I realized I couldn't keep calling him the dog. I thought about what Emily would have said, how she always believed animals had a way of finding the people who needed them most. So I named him Max. At first, Max was nothing but trouble. He chewed on my furniture, ran wild through the house, and had absolutely no interest in being trained. He was loud, energetic, and completely unaware of personal space. Every attempt at discipline failed. But despite the frustration, something strange was happening. Max had a way of forcing me to live again. His energy was relentless, his joy infectious. He didn't care about the past or the pain I carried. He only cared that I was there, that I was with him. And in his presence, the weight on my chest began to lighten, if only just a little. I still wasn't sure if I believed in fate, but if I did, I would have wondered if Emily had sent him to me. If, somehow, she had known that this small, helpless creature would be the one to pull me back from the edge. I had lost my wife, my purpose, my will to move forward. But now, there was someone, depending on me, and for the first time since Emily died, I found myself wondering if maybe, just maybe, I was meant to save him. Or if he was meant to save me. Max was chaos wrapped in golden fur. From the moment he set foot in my house, he seemed determined to dismantle what little order I had left. He chewed on my furniture, knocked over anything within reach, and had an endless supply of energy that no amount of walks could deplete. His favorite game appeared to be testing my patience. At first, I regretted bringing him home. I wasn't cut out for this. I barely had the energy to get through the day, let alone keep up with a hyperactive puppy that seemed immune to discipline. I tried setting rules. No jumping on the couch, no chewing on shoes, no barking at nothing. Max ignored every single one. The house that had once been silent and lifeless was now filled with constant movement and noise. It should have been frustrating. It should have made me want to give up. And yet, something strange was happening. Each morning, instead of waking up to a crushing sense of loneliness, I woke up to Max's wagging tail and eager eyes. Instead of spending my evenings drowning in grief, I spent them being dragged outside for walks I never would have taken on my own. He left no room for isolation. He didn't care that I wanted to wallow. He demanded attention, presence, and life. At first, I resisted, but Max was relentless. One day, as I sat on the couch, staring at the same blank television screen I had been using as background noise for months, Max jumped up beside me. He plopped his head onto my lap, looking up at me with those dark, knowing eyes. Without thinking, I started talking. "I don't know why you're here," I muttered, running a hand over his soft fur. "I don't even know if I want you here." He wagged his tail slightly, as if completely unbothered by my words. I sighed. "You're lucky you're cute." It started as small conversations, frustrated mutterings about his messes, offhand remarks when he did something ridiculous. But slowly, those mutterings turned into something else. I told him about my day, about Emily, about how I didn't know what I was doing anymore. He never responded, of course, but he listened. Always. It was ridiculous. I knew that. But there was something comforting about having someone, something to talk to. And for the first time since Emily died, I didn't feel completely alone. But there were still nights when the weight of it all became unbearable. One night, I found myself sitting on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by remnants of a life that no longer existed. Emily's books still lined the shelves. Her clothes still hung in the closet, untouched. The scent of her perfume had faded, but if I closed my eyes, I could still remember it. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to hold it together. But the grief was relentless, pressing down like an ocean tide determined to drown me. "I don't know how to do this," I whispered to the empty room. And then, suddenly, I wasn't alone. Max nudged my arm, his wet nose pressing insistently against my skin. When I didn't react, he whined and pushed harder, forcing me to lift my head. His big, brown eyes met mine, filled with something that almost resembled understanding. I let out a shaky breath. "You're not supposed to be in here." He didn't move. After a moment, I gave up and reached out, resting a hand on his fur. He settled beside me, pressing close, his warmth grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't much, just a small, simple gesture. But in that moment, it was everything. I thought about Emily, about how she always seemed to believe that animals had a way of knowing things humans couldn't, how they could sense pain, offer comfort in ways words never could. Had she been right? I had never been a particularly spiritual man. I believed in God, but I had never been one for deep faith. And after Emily died, I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. But as I sat there, feeling the steady rise and fall of Max's breath beside me, I wondered, had Emily sent him to me? It was an absurd thought, but the more I looked at Max, the less absurd it felt. Before that night, I had seen him as an accident, something that had happened by chance, a stray I had rescued because I was in the right place at the right time. But what if it wasn't an accident? What if Max had been sent to rescue me? I didn't have an answer, but as I sat there in the quiet, my fingers running absently through his fur, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The grief didn't disappear. The pain didn't vanish. But for the first time, it felt like I wasn't carrying it alone. That night, for the first time since Emily died, I slept without nightmares. And when I woke up the next morning, Max was still there, watching over me. From that moment on, something changed. I stopped seeing Max as a responsibility, stopped seeing him as just a dog. He was more than that. He was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I had convinced myself I was. And though I didn't know it then, he was leading me towards something far greater than I could ever imagine. It was a perfect afternoon, the kind that made me believe, if only for a moment, that life could still hold beauty. The sky was clear, the sun warm against my skin, and a soft breeze rustled the autumn leaves along the sidewalk. Max trotted beside me, his golden fur gleaming in the sunlight, his tail wagging with every step. These walks had become a ritual for us, a quiet escape from the weight of my thoughts. Max didn't care about the past or the future. He existed in the present, and with him, I was learning to do the same. We reached the crosswalk, pausing as a car slowed to let us pass. I gave a quick glance to both sides before stepping forward. Then, in an instant, everything changed. A deafening roar of engines shattered the quiet. Two cars, locked in a reckless race, shot out from behind the stopped vehicle. They came too fast, too close. Nothing but a blur of metal and motion. Max was ahead of me, stepping into the road first. I barely had time to react. I yanked the leash, shouting his name, but it was too late. The impact came like a storm. Sudden, violent, absolute. Pain exploded through my body as I was thrown into the air. Time seemed to slow, my mind grasping at fractured moments. The sky above, the pavement rushing toward me, the sound of screeching tires. And then, nothing. No pain, no sound, no sensation at all. Just darkness. Then, slowly, a warmth began to spread around me. A light, soft at first, then growing, surrounding me, pulling me forward. It wasn't the harsh glare of headlights or the artificial glow of hospital fluorescence. It was something else entirely. Something pure. Something alive. I felt weightless, free of fear or suffering. There was no confusion, no panic, just peace. A peace deeper than anything I had ever known. And then, I saw him. Jesus. He stood before me, his presence radiating warmth and love beyond comprehension. His robe shone with a brilliance unlike any earthly color, his face both familiar and divine. His eyes, filled with infinite understanding, locked onto mine, and I felt as if he had known me since the beginning of time. I opened my mouth, but no words came. What could I possibly say? Jesus spoke first. Daniel. Hearing my name from his lips sent a shiver through me, not of fear, but of awe. I swallowed, my voice barely a whisper. Am I dead? His expression was gentle, filled with something that felt like sorrow and reassurance all at once. Your journey is not yet complete. I tried to make sense of his words. I had just been hit. I had felt the impact, the force, the pain. How could I not be dead? And then another thought struck me, sudden and sharp. Max, my voice broke. Where is Max? Jesus held my gaze, and though he hadn't answered yet, something in my heart already knew. Max was gone. The realization shattered me. He had saved me in every way a living creature could, and now, just like that, he was taken from me. Tears burned my eyes. "Please," I begged, stepping forward. "Is he here? Is he safe?" Jesus reached out, placing a hand on my shoulder. The moment he touched me, warmth flooded through my soul. A love so vast, so boundless, that it melted every fear, every doubt. "Do not be afraid," he said. "There is something you must understand." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "Tell me." He smiled, though there was a depth in his expression I couldn't quite grasp. "All will be revealed in time." And with those words, the world around me began to shift. The light that had surrounded us grew brighter, enveloping everything in a golden glow. Shapes began to form. Rolling fields, towering trees, a sky so clear and blue it seemed untouched by sorrow. The air was filled with the scent of wildflowers, the sound of running water, the chorus of birds singing in perfect harmony. It was beautiful. It was perfect. And somehow I knew this was not Earth. This was something far beyond it. I turned back to Jesus, my mind racing. "What is this place?" He gestured toward the landscape stretching before us. "This is but a glimpse of the kingdom." The kingdom, heaven. A place I had never truly believed in, not in any real way. And yet, here I stood. Here I breathed. But even as awe filled me, so did grief. Because Max was not with me. Jesus must have seen the sorrow on my face. He placed a hand over his heart, his voice steady and certain. "Daniel, listen carefully. The love you have shared has not been in vain. Love, true love, is never lost." I felt my chest tighten. "Then tell me," I whispered. "Tell me where he is." Jesus looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. And in that moment, the world around me shifted again. Something was coming, something I could not yet see. But I knew, without question, that whatever it was, it would change everything. The golden light around us shimmered, shifting like the surface of a sunlit river. Jesus extended his hand toward me, his gaze filled with infinite love. "There is something I want you to see, Daniel." The moment he spoke, the air around us changed. The light expanded, stretching out into a vast and endless landscape. My breath caught in my throat. Before me lay a world unlike anything I had ever seen. It was more than beautiful. It was perfect. Rolling meadows of emerald green stretched as far as the eye could see, their blades of grass swaying in a breeze that carried the scent of something pure and untouched. Rivers of crystal-clear water flowed between golden hills, their currents alive with a radiance I could not describe. The sky was the deepest blue, untouched by storm or sorrow. And everywhere, I saw life. Animals ran freely, unafraid and unburdened. Wolves and lambs rested together beneath the shade of great trees, their bodies pressed close in peaceful companionship. Lions lay beside children who laughed as they ran their fingers through golden manes. Horses galloped across endless fields, their hooves barely touching the ground. Birds soared overhead, their songs harmonizing with the whisper of the wind. It was as if every creature that had ever known suffering had been restored, reborn into a world where pain no longer existed. I turned to Jesus, my voice caught between wonder and disbelief. This is heaven?" He smiled. "This is the kingdom as it was always meant to be. Before sin, before sorrow, before death." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling. "And the animals? They're all here?" Jesus nodded. "Creation was never meant to be divided. When the world fell, so too did all living things. But I tell you this, Daniel, when all is restored, nothing that was created in love will be lost." His words pressed into me like sunlight warming cold skin. I thought of Emily, of the way she had always believed animals carried a divine purpose, how she had cared for every creature with the same love she showed people. Had she known the truth all along? I turned back to the scene before me, my heart pounding. And then, I saw him. At first, he was just a flash of gold against the green, a streak of motion across the field. But then, as he drew closer, I knew. Max. He ran toward me with boundless energy, his body strong and whole. His eyes, bright, joyful, filled with the same love I had seen every day on earth, locked onto mine. Tears blurred my vision as I fell to my knees, opening my arms. Max, he reached me in seconds, colliding into me with uncontained excitement. His paws pressed against my chest, his tongue against my face, his tail wagging wildly. The warmth of him, the solid presence of him. It was real. He was real. I buried my face in his fur, my body racked with sobs. I thought I lost you. Jesus' voice was gentle behind me. Love does not end with death, Daniel. The bond you shared was not merely one of man and beast. It was one of spirit. I lifted my head, my hands still buried in Max's golden coat. But I don't understand. Do animals have souls? Jesus knelt beside me, placing a hand on Max's head. Not as humans do. They are not called to choose between good and evil, nor are they judged as you are. But they are my Father's creation, and in them dwells a spirit of life, breathed by God himself. I stared at Max, my fingers tracing the softness of his ears. And that means? Jesus smiled. Any creature that has shared a bond of love with a human, true, selfless love, will not be lost. For love is eternal, and what comes from God cannot simply fade into nothingness. The weight of his words settled over me, pressing into every broken place inside my heart. Emily had been right. All those times she had cradled abandoned kittens, nursed broken-winged birds, and whispered to frightened animals, telling them they were safe, she had known. She had understood what I had been too blind to see. Nothing truly loved is ever lost. Tears slipped down my face as I pulled Max close, holding him with everything in me. He had been my lifeline, my companion, my reason to keep going when I had nothing left. And now, here he was, whole and waiting for me. A question surfaced in my mind, laced with hesitation. Will I see him again? When my time truly comes. Jesus' expression softened. He will be waiting for you. My breath shuddered in my chest. And the others? Jesus gestured to the vast, endless fields beyond us. For every soul who has ever loved, their companions will be here. Not all animals are bound to humans, but those who have been part of your journey, those whose hearts have intertwined with yours, will have a place by your side. I looked at Max, at the joy in his eyes, the unwavering love, a love that had never asked for anything in return. My grip on him tightened. I don't want to leave him again. Jesus exhaled softly, reaching out to touch my shoulder. Daniel, you must return. The words cut through me like a blade. Why? Because there are others who need to hear this. His voice was steady, certain. There are those who grieve, who believe that death has stolen what they love forever. You must tell them the truth. I shook my head, gripping Max's fur. I don't want to go back. Jesus' eyes held mine, filled with an understanding so deep it nearly undid me. I know, but your purpose is not yet fulfilled. I clenched my jaw, torn between the overwhelming peace of this place and the ache of returning to a world without it. Jesus stood, extending a hand to help me rise. Go, Daniel, and when your time truly comes, you will return to a place where love never fades. Max whined softly, pressing his head against me. I bent down, pressing my forehead to his. I'll see you again, boy. I promise. As I whispered those words, the golden light around us began to shift, pulling me backward. The vision blurred, the warmth fading, and then darkness, and the sound of a distant voice calling my name. A sharp beeping sound pulled me from the darkness. I gasped as pain shot through my ribs, my head pounding with each weak breath I took. My body felt heavy, trapped beneath layers of exhaustion. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled my nose. A hospital. I was alive. Memories flooded back in a rush. The accident, the impact, the golden light. Jesus. Max. My chest tightened. Had it been real? Had I truly seen the kingdom? Or was it just a dream? A voice cut through my thoughts. He's awake. I turned my head slowly, wincing as pain flared through my neck. A nurse rushed to my side, calling for a doctor. I barely registered her words, my mind focused on only one thing. Max. I forced my voice through dry, cracked lips. My dog. Max, where is he? The nurse hesitated, sympathy in her eyes. He's alive, but my stomach twisted. He was badly injured. My breath caught. I need to see him. She shook her head. You need to rest, Mr. Carter. You've been in a coma for 3 days. You suffered a serious head injury, several broken ribs, and internal bleeding. It's a miracle you survived. A miracle. I barely heard the rest of her words as the reality of what had happened sank in. I had died. I had seen heaven. I had stood before Jesus himself. And Max. I clenched the sheets beneath my fingers. Please, tell me where he is. After a long pause, she sighed. He's in critical condition at the veterinary hospital across town. A weight pressed down on my chest. I have to see him. She placed a gentle hand on my arm. Let the doctors check on you first. Then we'll see what we can do. The hours that followed blurred together. Tests, scans, doctors murmuring about how lucky I was to be alive. But I wasn't thinking about myself. My thoughts remained fixed on Max. When they finally let me leave, I didn't care about the pain as I insisted on being taken to him. The veterinary hospital smelled of disinfectant and quiet sorrow. A technician led me through the hallways, her expression cautious. He's stable for now, she said softly, but the injuries were severe. He may not. I stopped her with a look. I couldn't hear those words. Not yet. Then I saw him. Max lay motionless on a small bed, bandages wrapped around his body, his breathing shallow. He looked so small, so fragile. I reached out with trembling fingers, resting a hand on his fur. I'm here, buddy. His ear twitched slightly. His tail barely moved. A choked breath escaped me. You held on. The vet said the next few days would determine whether he would survive. I didn't leave his side. I sat beside him, whispering prayers, remembering Jesus' words. And then, 3 days later, Max opened his eyes. He survived. Life moved forward, but I was never the same. I had seen what lay beyond. I had been given an answer so many had sought but never received. And I knew my purpose. I began telling my story, at first to close friends, then to anyone who would listen. Some dismissed it, calling it a hallucination, a trick of the brain. But others, those who had loved and lost, listened with wide eyes and trembling hands. They needed to hear it, because I had been sent back to tell them the truth. Animals are not just creatures of the earth. They are gifts, and the love we share with them is never lost. Max became a living symbol of that truth. He had nearly died that day, just as I had. But God had spared him, just as he had spared me. And so we lived. Years passed. The seasons changed. And though time moved forward, I never forgot what I had seen. Max grew older. His steps slowed. His once boundless energy softened into gentle companionship. He remained by my side, just as he always had. And then, one crisp autumn morning, I woke to find him lying still beside my bed, his body relaxed, his breathing peaceful. I knelt beside him, my hand resting over his heart. I love you, buddy, I whispered. You can rest now. His tail moved, just once, a final gesture of love, and then he was gone. Tears spilled onto my cheeks, but this time, they were not just of sorrow, because I knew that this was not the end. Max was not lost to me. He was waiting. Today, I share my story for those who have loved and lost, for those who have held a beloved pet in their arms and felt the unbearable weight of goodbye. Listen to me. Your love was not in vain. It was never just a moment in time. It was eternal. If you have ever loved an animal, if you have ever felt their unwavering devotion, their quiet understanding, know this. God sees that love. He created it. And when your time comes, when you take your final breath and step into the next world, do not be afraid. Because in that moment, in that place of unending light and peace, they will be there, waiting for you. Max will be waiting for me, and your beloved companion will be waiting for you. So until that day, cherish them. Love them with everything you have. Because love, true love, never dies. And neither do they.